coming, and we can set up a few more chairs if needed as folks come in, but we'll dive right in. We've got a lot to cover here in this fourth week of 5, and tonight we'll continue our conversation about vulnerability being the birthplace of creativity, innovation, and change, using the materials from Brené Brown. And you'll recognize this grid from our previous weeks, and we've been building the blocks up since we began with vulnerability and belonging. Last week looked at gratitude, and I was grateful for Jennifer to cover for me while I was on the beach in Mexico. Sorry. But you'll hear why, because tonight we'll talk about play and rest and how important they are, and well, I was just trying to do what Brene suggested. So tonight we'll look at worthiness, and then next week we'll try to put it all together. But before we dive into her materials, I wanted to use something of a different model that's been kind of floating in my head. And as people of faith, I think if there's something that brings me up just a little bit short with Brené Brown stuff, is it's so rich, it's so meaningful, it resonates so many ways for me, and yet I want that overlay of how do we as people of faith incorporate this into our lives as people of faith. She is a person of faith, but she has found her voice in the secular world. Nothing wrong with that whatsoever. Obviously, I find it as valuable enough to even do it here. But this is a way that we might look at things in an analogous way. The first is that theologians will often say the opposite of love is not hate, it's fear. The opposite of love is fear. Fear is the state of being that orients us away from love. When we are driven by fear, nothing but the fear of that which has our attention will be the subject of our energy. It consumes our energy in not life-giving ways. It impinges upon our ability to have compassion. It impedes our ability to be vulnerable. And fear betrays us by convincing us that the way to make it in life is to control life. And that is that fear prompts us to want to control things. But control is insidious because ultimately it's the fallacy. It's the great fallacy. We cannot really control our destiny. We can't control our children. We can't control our families. We can't control our workplaces, our spouses, or even the natural course of the world. Things happen. The experiment of modernity is one in which it's been trying to control things, and it has failed rather miserably. We are more fearful now than we were a century ago, I would maintain. Gated communities, alarm systems, gun proliferation, ecological disaster and catastrophe. These are the things that are the consequences of fear seeking control, and yet it doesn't work. It leads to desolation. Now, desolation is a term used by St. Ignatius in his spiritual practice, and I mean something a little different here, even though it's related. Desolation, sooner or later, is experienced by us all. Bad things happen. Why do bad things happen to good people? Well, just bad things happen. What happens in all of our lives is sooner or later we're brought low by something that we can't control, and fear is not going to keep it away. There's two ways to experience this desolation. One is to be brought low by external traumas and their corresponding internal spiritual traumas that just literally generate a loop back to more fear, more control, and back to more desolation. And it's a short circuit of that loop. Or the second is, it's an internal spiritual experience of being brought low that affords a breaking through into some new realization, some new awareness. And it ultimately involves an awareness of the emptiness in which trust can begin in the crucible of that being brought low. trust can be the healthy response to the desolation. Trust in God, trust in the goodness of creation as it was intended by God. We could unpack this for a whole series in and of itself, but suffice it to say that the invitation of desolation is to recognize that we don't control this, and that we have the opportunity to not try to cling on to the control, but to let go. And that's the notion of kenosis that we've talked about several times. It's letting go in that non-anxious way that allows one to discover the unburnished presence of God's love in your life. It is the means by which we can make our spiritual worship, to use the language of Paul. Worship is that contracted word in the Anglo-Saxon etymology that means worship. When we worship God, when we release the control, the need to control those things of which we are afraid, and we turn into the love of God, then we understand our own worthiness in that relationship. We understand the connection. We are made in God's image. And so that's the backdrop that I want us to hopefully hear Brené Brown this evening. We'll look at about a 9-minute video on worthiness and belonging and love, and then a little bit later we'll look at a second segment. But let me just set it up that way. Any questions before we launch the video or comments, Pat?
I think it's important to know that even though we go through the cycle of kenosis and love, we need not let go. I mean, we may still have the sorrow of the desolation.
Yeah, and were y'all able to hear that even though we go through the kenosis in love, that we don't lose the sorrow of the desolation? Thank you for saying that. Perhaps the cycle is misrepresented here to suggest that we leave one and we go to another. There's almost, think of it almost like in spirals, that we're always experiencing all of these. We never fully release our fears in a way that controls us. We never can fully release the desire to control things. We never fully release, nor should we, the sorrows that come with life. But they inform who we are. There's a very Christological way to think about it, that we bear the stigmata of our crucified existence in life. Yeah, Alan, were you going to say something?
Book about this we can buy and read.
I haven't written it yet. This is just something that's been percolating in my head for a few weeks as we've been doing this, and so I'm trying it on for you tonight. And I saw a few nodding heads, so
work on it. It's good.
Again, as has become our custom, if you'll get into pairs and spend just 5 minutes or so on these two questions, or two groups of questions. How would you define worthiness? And what does it mean to be lovable, and how do you experience that in your life? How do you play and rest in your life? Would you describe your life as balanced, and why or why not? Just 2 or 3 minutes each, and then I'll call it a switch, and then you'll go to the other. All right? So any thoughts, comments, remarks? Yeah, Alan?
You may not like this because it's a problem I'm having with Brené Brown. Are we allowed to do that? Are we allowed to?
Are you allowed to do what?
Have a bone to pick with the guru of the night who's talking.
Yes.
That person.
Yes.
She says, she talks about play, everybody has to play in balance, and I have a little bit of a problem with it. I'm not a doctrinaire Marxist, but sometimes I have a Marxist response to things, okay? And I'm a little disturbed because there's a lot of people that just don't have any time to play because they might have to work 2 jobs to survive. There just isn't, there are a lot of people in the world who are at survival level, and I'm always disturbed by yuppie therapists with nice hairstyles like her who, you know, she's very genuinely herself, and she doesn't really, totally absent from all that is an acknowledgement that a lot of people may not have time to play. So I feel like her presentation is a presentation for the comfortable upper middle class.
Fair enough. And, you know, the nice hairdo gets me too, so. But you're absolutely right. You know, if we were to look at Maslow's hierarchy of needs, this is not working off of that basic level of subsistence. This is for those who have those needs met. How do we work on improving and breaking open our lives for good things?
And I'm not trying to be a naysayer or negative.
No, the point's well taken. Yeah, Pat?
I don't know if you noticed the person who was visiting me today, Michelle.
Yeah,
She works with Share Real.
right?
We were playing.
Yeah,
We were talking about serious things, but we were verbally playing. And she is at subsistence level, and that's what keeps her going, is the ability to play where she is.
yeah. Roberta?
On the worthiness piece, I was sharing that, and it wasn't just your introduction, I don't think, but the first thought, as soon as she said worthiness, I thought, well, the essence, I mean, my sense of worthiness really comes from my faith. And, you know, the years of my life, you know, of incorporating God's love into who I am, that's essentially what makes me deeply worthy. Now, you know, I've fallen into the whole trap about, you know, being successful, being productive, etc. But the core of worthiness for me is that, you know, created in God's image, God loving me.
Yeah, well, thanks for
But
sharing that.
lovable is different. I never thought, am I lovable or not? What is that? Does that mean you're a warm, fuzzy, cuddly person? That's not me.
Yeah, I didn't, so did y'all hear the question, what does lovable mean? Does that mean that you're a warm, cuddly person? I didn't take it that way. I meant that I took it to mean that you recognize your worthiness of being loved, that you're lovable by virtue of the fact that you're worthy of love, which is, of course, a religious message. It doesn't have to be only religious, but it's certainly part of every world religion. That's a yes. Diane?
For me, lovable is being open.
Being open.
Being open, so that if you understand your own worthiness, you can be open towards others and lovable towards others, in the sense of being there for them and listening and having compassion and having true conversations with them.
Yeah. Other thoughts? Because Diane's comments just then lead nicely to our next segment, but I don't want to shortcut the conversation here. Well, if not, let's move on then to a segment on how we're able to be imperfect with others, how we're willing to let them see our blemishes, our scars, our imperfections. And she will run through them very quickly at the outset here, 4 myths of vulnerability. So she runs through them, just fires them off. So let me just name them here again. 4 myths of vulnerability. One is that vulnerability is a sign of weakness. That I can't allow others to see me be vulnerable because that will mean that they'll see me as weak. The second is that we can choose in life not to do vulnerability. I think that's called antisocial personality disorder, among other things. The third is that we can go it alone. That we can figure out this life solo. The individual, the rugged individualism, the myth of that. And the fourth is that we can do it without trust, without trusting others, and without being willing to be trusted. Okay? So this one's a little bit longer, about 15 minutes. I thought about fragmenting it some, but she's just got so many good morsels through it. We're going to watch it in its entire 15 minutes, and then we will have some time to talk, and we'll spend a little bit more time unpacking it in your pairs. Just think about 7 minutes or so, so 3 or 4 minutes each in your tandem, and Think of a time in your life when you did something really courageous or brave. What role did vulnerability play? Did you feel uncertain? Did it feel risky? Did you feel emotionally exposed? You might have to choose one or two. Why do you trust the trustworthy people in your life? What do those individuals do that add to marbles to your marble jar? All right? So, break. We'll watch another video clip or two and continue our conversation. I have put on your tables several copies of a homework. If you want to engage that, go home and continue this work. Any parting comments or conversation before we break for the night? Anyone have something they want to share for everybody? If not, as always, thank you. Oh, sorry, Sandra.
No, I don't want to share it necessarily, but I want to understand it. Losing the ability to belong rails against our DNA, or belonging rails against our DNA. She said something like that. Do you remember?
Yeah, it was something about DNA. So, as always, thank you all for being here. If you have a chance to help break down chairs and tables so we can get ready for the holidays, it's appreciated. But if not, we send you on your way with a blessing.